Welcome back, all data heroes. How's it going so far? I hope you're getting some value out of these amazing conversations. I hope I'm not yelling. My caffeine is slowly fading through the day. And thank you so much for being here. If we haven't said that enough today, thank you for your engagement. Throw some messages into the chat if you've got questions. DM me on LinkedIn. Hey, by the way, if you didn't connect with me on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Enough advertising. I'm thrilled to be joined by my friends, AI Enablement and Tom Eastlake from the amazing company of Neudesic. We are going to have a panel. You should have known because I'm now in panel mode here. Can you tell? We're going to have a panel about the blueprint for AI enablement. Martin said MDM enablement. We can talk about that if you want to, but we're going to talk about AI enablement mostly, and maybe we'll talk about some MDM. Sai, Tom, thanks so much for joining. Glad you could be here.
So much, Malcolm. Very excited to take part of this, and been listening to some of these sessions prior to this. So much of great content from so many leaders. So very exciting.
Hey, neighbor, what's going on in Florida?
No hurricanes yet.
Okay. We can't say the same for everybody in the south of the U.S. today. So glad you guys could join. Thanks. And by the way, Sai and Tom work for a great company, Neudesic. They're a partner of Profisee. If you are looking for a consultant to help guide your data strategy, data governance, MDM, you name it, they have experts that know this stuff. You should definitely consider them, as well as Avinod Florin from a previous session. My brain is going. Hey, let's talk about AI enablement. I am pretty plugged into LinkedIn and the news and everything, and I've been hearing a lot of rumblings. A lot of people online are saying the AI bubble has burst. Oh, the AI bubble has burst. There's numbers being thrown around of 600 or 700 billion being spent on AI, but only 100 billion in ROI. I'd be interested to know who's measuring that industry-wide ROI. But Tom, over to you first. What would your first reaction be to this idea of AI bubble bursting?
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable, depending on what your definition of that is. I mean, what we've seen for sure is, I think what everyone has seen, everybody jumping on the Gen AI bandwagon in 2023 and trying to get some quick wins, but often coming up with disappointing results, right? So the magic factor has been dulled down a little bit when people realize we still have to do work, right? So when the quick, rag playground approach was not sufficient, which is most of the times, it turns out that in addition to the importance of really learning, what can be done with system prompting and other techniques to set context and data analysis and preparation, it turns out to be really critical to having a good strategy for chunking embeddings, building vector indexes. So, as well as for doing LLM fine tuning, which some of the more advanced shops are already getting into. So that, in other words, the more that things change, the more they stay the same in some respects. It's all about data prep to make these things work well.
All right, we're definitely gonna talk a little bit more about some things. Anytime I hear anybody say chunking, I want to learn more. But Sai, what's your reaction to this idea of the AI bubble bursting? What are you seeing out there in the market?
It's a great question, Malcolm. And as you mentioned earlier, about following a lot of these surveys, being active on LinkedIn, I do the same as well, trying to learn as much as I can, because there's so much data that we're talking about, data solutions around Gen AI that we're talking about, things that evolve at rapid pace. But the one thing that strikes a chord is, when we talk about AI bubble burst, this kind of reminds me of what happened in the 2000s with the dot-com bubble burst. Yeah. Right? Everybody, you saw how the stocks were dripping, things were going really south, before they went really high. And then we saw how steady it became, because you could see how the internet has changed things forever, right? There's just, I can't really fathom the idea of not having internet these days, especially. So you can see how that has changed and evolved over time. I kind of see something similar with this topic around AI bubble burst. Because if one thing that we learned from the past is, it is essential, it is important. We just have to learn to see how we can best apply it to the real world use cases. I've talked to a lot of other Gen AI practitioners as well, in the industry, and as much as there's excitement, there's also a need for us to realize what's most important. You need quality data. You need to, because it's so important to have quality data, because that's what you're training your models on. And for your models to give you the outputs that you expect, the accuracy that you expect, you need to make sure that you're taking care of your foundations first. So that's very critical in my opinion, and there's a lot of other steps that come with it. We'll talk about more detail, but I don't truly believe the AI bubble has burst. I instead think, it's only prepping us for what's to come ahead.
Yes, it's a great point. I mean, I see a lot of similarities. This is real gray hair here, folks. And I was around for the explosion of the internet, and I see a lot of similarities with people saying, "Oh, people are never going to buy washing machines online. They're never going to buy televisions online. They're still going to, yeah, and they're buying televisions online." So a lot of the same FUD, what was present a while ago with the internet. But so at the same time, we can agree that maybe the bubble hasn't burst, but maybe the sheen has come off a little bit. Maybe in Gartner speak, maybe we are getting towards maybe a little bit of a trough of disillusionment potentially around this, and which means the companies are just trying to kind of figure it all out. I'll throw a couple of data points at you, and we'll use this to kind of drive our next conversation. So a recent McKinsey survey found that 70% of companies are using some form of generative AI. Yet another New Vantage survey recently associated with the CDO IQ conference found that only 5% of companies actually have some sort of customized LLM or some customized generative AI solution. I would include in that like complex RAG patterns or vector databases and the things like Tom mentioned before. So you have this 70%, customized solution, or 70% broad-based adoption, and 5% customized solutions. To me, that 70% is people using off-the-shelf chatbots, right? You're in sales, you're in marketing. Maybe you're using ChatGPT to do some marketing content for you. Maybe you're using it to do some market research. But that suggests that a lot of the usage of Gen AI solutions out there today is kind of happening outside the purview of a data and analytics team. So my first question is, do you see that? Do you agree with my assertions? And if yes, what do we need to do as data people to go from 5% to something greater than that? Tom, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think we're seeing that. It kind of goes to what I was thinking before, that I think certainly every client that we see that either doesn't have a great fear of AI that they haven't processed yet, right, and so therefore haven't begun to dabble, and probably haven't gotten to the maturity level, or don't have the resources, or haven't engaged with a partner to build the more complex, more robust Gen AI powered solutions. They're in that space of using, signing up for Copilot, for using Microsoft Copilot as an example. We certainly use it extensively. Everybody's got to use these tools these days to be as productive as they can be. I think that the 5, 6, 7% that have meaningful, impactful production solutions using LLMs, and that especially those that have the ability to measure and demonstrate the ROI related to those solutions, those are still in the minority, so that resonates with me definitely, and what we've been seeing.
All right, we're gonna talk more about how to increase that number, but I'd love to hear your perspectives here. What are you seeing?
Yeah, what Tom mentioned, Malcolm, but it would be really interesting to learn more about the context behind these surveys. Honestly,
yeah, of course.
What region, location, what are the customers, what industries they've been targeting and talking to. But I'd love to learn more about it. But I've been like I said earlier, I've been looking at a lot of these surveys, right? There is a definite interest and excitement, and to push forward to create that differentiation for your organizations by implementing more generative AI solutions. But the key points here again is, I feel instead of looking for quick wins, they're important. They're important. Quick wins are important. we also need to analyze, like, what would the future look like? What's the vision behind this? How do we target this? What use cases do we prioritize? And do we have the resources to tackle that? As Tom mentioned, do we understand the requirements around infrastructure? Do we understand the requirements around sensitivity and security? These things are very important, and these are very core to how because most of the time when you're talking about leveraging LLMs and even SLMs for that matter, you're training that on your data. Let's say you're fine tuning. You got to make sure that you have good security around it. So these things become fundamental, right? This is something that we've always been talking about in the past. We want to, I was talking about the quality of data, mastering your data. You're talking about infrastructure, network security. These are very, very important topics that we've been talking about for a very long time, but it becomes all the more important now, with all the generative AI solutions we're talking about. And when it comes to return on investment, with chatbots, as you mentioned, Malcolm, you could probably see that really quick, customer-facing chatbots, adding value to your organization. But, if you're looking for something like a supply chain optimization project, something more along the lines of a critical use case or complex use case with regulatory rules and compliance needs, these things are you potentially won't see a quick return on investment. You're planning for the long term, but setting up the stage, getting these foundations in place, making sure you're heading in the right direction, you can see the long-term benefits of it with generative AI, in my opinion. And that will really create that differentiator for your organizations in this competitive landscape. Because if you don't leverage generative AI right now, most probably you're being left behind. When you're looking at it, so it's very important to consider it, but take small steps. This is something that we talk to our customers all the time. When you're talking about master data management solutions, start small. Starts with a specific domain. Starts with a small use case or specific use case. Do the same for generative AI solutions. Start with something in mind instead of going, to the broader solution at once, expanding it. So I would say that's very important to consider, all the other aspects associated with it before jumping in, implementing a full-blown solution.
Yeah, such great advice there. I mean, the starting simple is key. My bigger concern with the 5% versus 70%, and we could quibble about whether those are accurate and the details of the survey, but based on my hundreds of conversations that I'm having at all the data events that I go to, the conversations I have day in and day out on LinkedIn, I think the 5% is largely, is largely directionally true. My bigger concern is that you've got data leaders out there that are reacting with a lot of FUD, and rightfully so. Don't get me wrong. There are big things here that we need to be concerned about. We need to be concerned about governance. We need to be concerned about data quality. But my bigger concern is that a lot of data leaders are just kind of pushing and saying, whoa, 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 whoa. And meanwhile, folks in the business units are just going forward, right? They're turning on the chatbots. They're turning on the smart agents, and they're using them, and they're driving value. So my recommendation to data leaders would be what you just said, Sai, which is find the appropriate use case, right? If you're concerned about audit or compliance, if you're concerned about, hallucinations, then maybe, a legal or a finance use case isn't the right one. Probably not. Maybe there are other use cases here that are more appropriate. So let's return to the idea of the foundation. Sai, you mentioned this. So I'm going to come back to you, Sai. So when we're thinking about operationalizing these co-pilots and chatbots at scale, and we think of the traditional foundations of data management, data governance, MDM, data quality, data integration, when we think about some of those traditional foundations, what do we need to do to bring those things together to support wide-scale adoption of Gen AI solutions?
Good question, Malcolm. Again, this is such an important topic, right? When you're looking at scaling your Gen AI solutions, start with the most basic need that you have, right? You got to define your success criteria. Okay, now you've aligned on, okay, this is my specific use case. It could be for a specific business unit. This is my success criteria, and this is what I hope to look from a return on investment perspective. Once you've defined that, okay, what sort of data that am I talking about here? Is there disparate data sources that we're targeting? And how is the data being ingested into my data platform today? And am I looking at some redundant data? Is there scope for me to do some lakehouse hygiene here? How do I make sure that, there's no duplicate data? Again, goes back to quality. Tracking that lineage becomes important. Where does the data come from and where does it go to? And, with all that in place, again, I cannot emphasize enough on security. How secure is my data? And, mostly with regulatory industries like, financial sectors, or government projects, you're almost always talking about, PHI information, PII information, the encryption needed around that. These things become basis of that and how you're actually making your data available to tricks it, to probably train your model or even leverage some of the RAG frameworks, that there is to be able to, establish that prompt query response initiatives. However, what is your use case? Are you looking at, I talked about RAG architecture here. So are you looking at generating as an endpoint that you could leverage for an application that you already have in place? Now, if it then comes a point around, is it a custom application or is it a native application that there is? And then what sort of tweaking is needed from that perspective? This could define, is your use case complex? And is it the right use case that you want to target from the get-go? Or you want to start with something smaller than that, where you're actually implementing this for a QA chatbot. It could be internal. It doesn't have to be customer facing, because there is a lot of productivity issues that you could also solve by picking a specific use case that's internal and minimal risk comparatively, right? So these are, we've heard about cases where, there's public facing chatbots that have created some incorrect responses that have cost real business value for customers. And I don't want to go into the details, but that's why I say start small, minimal risk, identify your use case, put down the success criteria for that, and then get started with your data foundations.
Yeah, a great example would be just having an internal deployment of a chatbot, right? Like there's plenty of examples out there. Like, could you load your employee handbook, right? Could you load that into some sort of database and vectorize it in order to have a chatbot consume that, so that you can have a chat like an HR chatbot, right? Like just like your HR co-pilot to help interpret. That's one example, and it's never even going to get beyond your four walls, but it's still going to allow you as the data leader to say, hey, I'm innovating, I'm leaning forward, I'm doing some pretty cool stuff here, and we're leveraging LLMs to get it done. That's just one example. So Tom, previously you had mentioned a couple of things that some of our listeners may not be that familiar with. You had mentioned vectorizing data. You had mentioned chunking of data. I assume those are within the context of building some sort of complex RAG patterns to help limit any sort of hallucinations. Is that where you were going with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you talk about use cases. The thing that is probably the most sought after in the market that we see at the moment is sort of that document search and Q&A capability. So like with you talked about as a good potential quick win for an organization to take internal documents and make them available to the LLM so that they have that enhanced context where they're able to answer questions. And as we know, the LLM will usually answer a question. The question is, is how good it is, right? And sometimes it asserts things with great seeming authority, which are entirely wrong. And so what we were talking about there, just at a high level is, most of the data, not all, but most of the data being used for RAG patterns, for retrieval augmented generation patterns with LLMs, most of that data is unstructured data. And typically the most common that we see is PDF or Word document or even text file type document type data that isn't in a structured mode, right? It isn't coming from a relational database or a spreadsheet, for example. So you have to, in order to get that data out of those documents and expose them to the LLM in a way that that the LLM can utilize them, you have to arbitrarily or intelligently decide how you're going to break up those pieces of unstructured data and store them as embeddings to the LLM, so that then you can vectorize and create indexes on them so that the LLM can utilize those in doing similarity search and so forth in answering questions. It's a little more complicated than that, obviously, but a lot of what happens when I talk about like the the RAG playground approach. You know, whether you're messing with Databricks or Azure AI Studio or other products that are out there, and there are lots of interesting and powerful ones. You have to determine, you know, how am I going to ingest this data and break it up into some kind of logical chunks that where the index is built off of them will actually be useful in doing comparisons and searching. You know, there's different things that have to be done. But when I talk about data preparation, what I think is most important to point out is that if you get familiar with what's actually in your structured data, and you're able to, in some cases, we even are, you know, parsing through those things and extracting that data into actual more structured data before then creating embeddings and doing vector indexing. So, but the point being, you've got to analyze your data just like in the old days, just like in all eras. You have to do some profiling and analysis and understand what your data really holds. And then you have to take the appropriate approach. And, you know, you may have to do cleansing. Typically, that's not the case with unstructured data. But do whatever you got to do to get the data in a place where you can appropriately prepare it for the LLM to utilize it in answering your questions. And just uploading some PDFs and using an arbitrary chunking strategy and creating an index usually doesn't give great results. It needs to be more deliberate than that.
Yeah, Tom, you touched on just a lot of things there that I think are worthy of peeling the onion on. There's a great irony here in that I think that Gen AI could be an incredibly powerful tool for helping expose data quality issues in those unstructured data sets. Absolutely. Where you could actually load a whole bunch of stuff into an LLM and then ask it questions and have it tell you and suggest, hey, there could be some problems here. But you touched on the whole unstructured data thing. There's some questions in the chat. One, Dan, I saw your question about navigating a complex regulatory environment. My goodness, that's probably a full day, if not a full, a conference in and of itself. The only thing I would say is keep your lawyer friends happy and keep them close, and keep your CISO happy and close when you're working on a lot of this stuff. The next question was from Steve, is that, shouldn't you just go and fix all of your data? Well, if it were only that easy. And what do you mean by fix? Because the quality needed for a marketing use case is different than the quality needed for any fraud or legal or compliance use case. So there's a lot of nuance here. And ultimately, what I would say, Steve, is that there's a whole world, and Tom just talked about this, there's a whole world of unstructured data that generally falls outside of the scope of a lot of governance programs. There's data sitting on marketing SharePoint servers. There's data sitting in HTML files sitting on web servers that hasn't been touched in years and years and years that may still be publicly accessible. It's that kind of stuff I'm a little more worried about. So when it comes to the issue of unstructured data, what sort of advice would you be giving your clients in order to get their arms around it?
We're seeing a lot of these taking the top seat here, right, Malcolm? We're talking about sentiment analysis and things like that. Social media presence, almost all organizations, are very privy to that. So you're looking at all of this data, which is unstructured in nature. And how do you go about it? What do you do? And yes, for sure, we should be able to leverage, these large language models, that could help in sort of data validation, and also troubleshooting those quality issues, anomaly detection, and things like that, right? You could train your models or a subset of your model data, that could be catered to just solving this critical data quality issues, and identifying those bad records. What could potentially give you responses that are not accurate, right? So if you could leverage specifics to that, I think that in itself is a great first step, even before you go out build out a full scale Q&A chatbot, customer-facing Q&A chatbot, right? Leverage Gen AI. I mean, that's a great use case for Gen AI implementation too, right? Which is not leaving your organizations or not customer-facing in nature, but you're actually cleansing your data, leveraging Gen AI.
Exactly.
Right. So I think that's another great use case there. Could help in unstructured data, and all the more reason, if you're looking at structured data, that's kind of what we've been evolving for the past couple of decades. But you're actually seeing increasing unstructured data now. There is at least about 65 to 70% of data in most enterprise organizations where unstructured data hasn't been touched. And you gave a great example, Malcolm, where documents knowledge base that's living in SharePoint and OneDrives, or it could be in just FTP servers, something that's archived for 10 years or something. You probably never looked at it, but imagine how powerful that data could be to train your model, right? Because that's tons of information that's unused, which could potentially put you in a great spot to do generative AI deployments, leveraging those to train your models, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something we need to understand. What data we have today, and how useful could it be to identify what data I could be getting in tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a discovery process, but it's going wider than the rows and the columns, right? It's discovering outside of the world you already discovered today. What's out there from an unstructured perspective? I think that's sound advice for all data leaders, all data practitioners to embark on. One thing I want to just touch on, we've used the words fine tune, we've used the words train, we've used the words RAG. I want our attendees today to know that sometimes these words really matter. GPT, the P stands for pre-trained. The model is largely trained. So when you hear us say train or fine-tune, I think, keep me honest, guys, that we're basically kind of using train and fine-tune synonymously, where there are open source models where you can influence and you can train them so that they have consistent answers over time. There are RAG patterns where it's a little more transactional, where you are in the query putting in data into the prompt to control and influence the prompt. Tom, do you see the same distinction there? Do you draw a distinction between kind of training and fine tuning versus influencing via these complex prompts?
Yeah, absolutely.
Before Tom jumps in, I just want to add something real quick, Malcolm.
Yeah.
A quick note I want to make is, before you start your journey in leveraging either RAG frameworks or pre-training or fine-tuning, always, there's these 4 sectors. I've been working a lot with a lot of organizations where start with prompt engineering, get to RAG acceleration frameworks, right? Then get to fine-tuning, and then you can pre-train instead of directly to the integration. Just wanted to call that out there.
Love it. What would you add, Tom?
I like that. In terms of choosing, starting with the low-hanging fruit, what's the easiest thing to do? There's no question that a lot of folks are not aware of how much they can influence the results that they get from an LLM or an SLM just by prompting. And then you can go a step beyond that. If it's going to be very interactive, you can build chains to manage the user interaction and to do certain things or answer certain things in certain ways, depending on user inputs and so forth. And then kind of the next step is, and we're talking about in terms of ease, right? Not in terms of the evolution of the technology. So it's almost backwards. But the next step for many organizations is, I've got an LLM or an SLM, which is already trained, because the vast majority of the cost is in training those models. But when we say fine tuning, it's like doing a little bit of additional training to add to the knowledge that the base model has. And in between there's that using that RAG pattern, which is going beyond prompting and using data that, you might even be getting it on a near real-time basis and updating those embeddings and updating the indexes so that the LLM has more near real-time knowledge of things that you're trying to feed to it. And that typically has a little more expense to it, depending on the platform. And then, the big bang is to actually train your own model on your own vast amount of data, which is something that most organizations are never going to be able to take on. And I would argue, nor will they ever really have the need to.
Couldn't agree more. We need to get wrapping here, guys. Couldn't agree more. You're not going to be building your own model. These cost tens and tens of millions of dollars and thousands of GPUs to build your own models, but you can certainly influence them. Thank you so much, guys, for participating, for sharing your knowledge, for letting us know what's out there. Just to summarize, keep it simple. Find a use case, guys. Find something out there that can drive value to solve some problems. Start simple. You can get on your AI journey today. There's tons of value out there. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you for being a data hero, and we'll talk to you guys sometime soon.